the 12th of January 1943. North Atlantic, west of Ireland. The sea is black glass broken by wind, and U-456 knifes through it on the surface. Diesel engines thudding like a heartbeat beneath the deck plates. As Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Keller stands in the conning tower, collar turned up against the cold, binoculars pressed to his eyes while spray lashes his face and freezes in his beard. Below him, the Atlantic stretches unseen and hostile, but to Keller it feels familiar now, almost obedient, a hunting ground he has crossed and recrossed since the war began, where the night still belongs to the U-boats and the enemy remains blind and clumsy, their convoys strung out like cattle waiting for the knife. The bridge watch murmurs, bearings, and wind speed, their voices clipped and practiced. And somewhere aft, a sailor hums softly. The tune, swallowed by the engines and the wind, as if even sound fears being heard in this ocean. Keller lowers the binoculars and allows himself a thin smile, because the radio message received hours earlier still rings in his ears. A convoy sighted, westbound, heavy tonnage, weak escort, the kind of report that once again promises a night of fire and steel. He remembers the words drilled into him at Kiel. The lectures and maps and chalked arrows on blackboards. The calm confidence of Admiral Karl Dönitz himself, who had called them the wolves of the Atlantic and taught them to hunt in packs, overwhelming the enemy with speed, darkness, and surprise. For years it had worked, devastatingly so, and Keller has watched merchant ships burn from horizon to horizon, watched sailors leap into freezing water under flares that turned the sea white as bone, watched the lifeboats scatter like leaves while his boat slipped away untouched into the dark. Inside U-456, the air is thick with oil and sweat and boiled cabbage, the smell of men who have lived too long in steel confinement. But morale remains high, fed by victories chalked on the control room bulkhead, and by the belief, unspoken yet absolute, that the Atlantic is still Germany's to claim. Oberleutnant Zersi Hans Meyer, the first watch officer, climbs up to relieve Keller, stamping his feet against the cold and glancing out into the darkness with eager eyes, asking quietly if the convoy report has been confirmed. Keller nods, passing down orders with the ease of routine, instructing Meyer to maintain course and speed, to keep the boat surfaced as long as possible, because night remains their ally and time is on their side. Far below, in the radio room, the headphones crackle with bursts of coded transmissions. U-boats scattered across the ocean, reporting sightings, converging, forming the invisible net that has strangled Allied shipping since the early days of the war. No one aboard U-456 yet senses how much has changed, because the changes are subtle, hidden in laboratories and shipyards far from this dark water, carried not by rumor but by mathematics, magnetrons, and quiet men in uniforms who do not smell the sea. Across the Atlantic, escort captains scan their scopes more intently than before, radar screens glowing faintly in sealed compartments. Operators trained to recognize the smallest flicker. But here, on the bridge of a German submarine, the enemy still feels distant, theoretical, and slow. Keller glances at his watch and calculates intercept courses in his head, imagining the silhouettes of freighters rising out of the night, their black hulls and pale wakes, imagining the tremor of the boat as torpedoes leave their tubes, imagining the explosion that follows, a concussion felt through steel and bone alike. He does not imagine detection, because detection has always been uncertain, a matter of luck and chance. And luck has favored him before. Below decks, men prepare quietly, checking torpedoes, adjusting valves, moving with the economy of long habit, each man sealed into his role as tightly as the pressure hull seals them from the crushing weight of the ocean. The Atlantic wind carries the distant scent of coal smoke, faint but unmistakable. And Keller lifts his binoculars again, heart quickening, knowing that somewhere ahead the enemy steams on, unaware, trusting the darkness that once betrayed them again and again. Behind him, the German ensign snaps sharply, a small red, white, and black defiance against the vast indifference of sea and sky. As U-456 presses forward, confident, aggressive, and utterly convinced that the war beneath the waves is still theirs to win. The 13th of January, 1943. North Atlantic, west of Ireland. The convoy appears first as a smudge against the darker horizon, barely perceptible even to trained eyes. And Keller feels the familiar tightening in his chest as the shapes resolve into masts and funnels, a slow-moving procession cutting a pale scar through the water. U-456 rides the surface with predatory ease, engines throttled back just enough to keep pace, spray feathering over the bow while the conning tower looms like a shadow stitched into the night. And Keller knows this moment as well as he knows his own reflection in polished steel. Meyer whispers estimates of range and speed, and Keller answers in murmured commands, his voice steady, almost casual, because there is no reason for haste yet. Patience has always been the sharpest weapon of the U-boat arm. The convoy escorts are there, of course, dark shapes pacing the perimeter, their wakes flashing briefly under starlight. But they feel inadequate. Spread thin over too much water, guardians more symbolic than effective. Below decks, the torpedo room crews wait in tense silence, hands resting on cold metal, listening to the faint creak of the hull and the distant throb of engines transmitted through the sea, each man counting seconds and breaths without realizing it. Keller orders a gentle turn to port, adjusting the intercept angle, and U-456 responds obediently, the helmsman's hands steady on the wheel as if guiding a living thing rather than a machine. For a moment, Keller remembers earlier patrols, the early days of the war, when escorts were few and inexperienced, when convoys sailed without air cover and the night was truly blind, when the Atlantic seemed endless and forgiving. He remembers the pride of those first victories, the congratulatory signals from headquarters, the knowledge that Germany's reach extended far beyond Europe, strangling the enemy's lifelines, one ship at a time. The convoy draws closer now, individual hulls emerging from the dark, their sides stained with rust and salt, deck lights dimmed to pinpricks, crews unaware that death stalks them from just beyond sight. Keller orders the deck gun crew to stand by, though he doubts they will be needed tonight. Torpedoes are enough, cleaner and safer, striking unseen and disappearing before retaliation can form. A sudden gust carries voices across the water, distorted and faint, human sounds that briefly pierce the abstraction of targets and tonnage. And Keller pushes the thought aside, because sentiment has no place here. Not in this war. Not on this night. The first escort passes closer than expected, its silhouette sharp against the stars. And for a heartbeat, Keller feels a flicker of unease. But the ship steams on without change, blind as ever, and the feeling fades. Orders flow downward, the dive alarm ringing softly, as U-456 slips beneath the surface, the sea closing over the deck with a hiss, and then a muffled thunder, the world narrowing to gauges, red lights, and the intimate pressure of steel. Inside the control room, voices are hushed, movements precise, and the air grows heavier as the boat settles at periscope depth. Keller's eye pressed to the lens as he scans the convoy from below. The ship's magnified and vulnerable. He picks his targets carefully, prioritizing the largest silhouettes, tankers and freighters, heavy with fuel and supplies, knowing that each sinking ripples far beyond this patch of ocean. Rohr eins, loss, he orders, and the boat shudders as the first torpedo streaks away, followed by a second, and then a third, each departure marked by a subtle change in sound and pressure. Seconds stretch into an eternity, broken only by the soft hum of motors and the whispered count, until the night explodes into violence. A distant flash followed by a dull, concussive boom that reverberates through the hull. Another explosion follows, then another, and the control room erupts into controlled chaos. Men grinning, clenching fists, murmuring confirmations as Keller calmly issues orders to turn away and descend. Through the periscope, he glimpses fire climbing into the sky, black smoke billowing as a freighter lists and begins to die, and the sight fills him with grim satisfaction rather than joy, because this is work, necessary, and relentless. Depth increases, the hull creaks faintly under pressure, and the sounds of the convoy shift from steady engines to frantic whistles and shouted commands. Chaos spreading across the water's surface. For a time, the escorts seem uncertain, their searchlights stabbing blindly, their maneuvers disorganized. And Keller allows himself to believe that tonight is another confirmation of old truths. He signals headquarters with a brief report, sinking confirmed, and imagines the marker being added to a map far away, another small victory in a war measured by shipping losses and endurance. As U-456 slips deeper and turns away, Keller feels the familiar exhaustion settle into his bones, mixed with the confidence of survival, because once again they have struck and vanished, untouched by the enemy's grasp. Yet somewhere beyond the range of his instruments, unseen and unheard, new eyes are already opening over the Atlantic, patient and unblinking, waiting for the wolves to surface again. The 4th of February 1943. Bay of Biscay. Off the coast of France, the dawn comes gray and low over the Bay of Biscay, the sky pressing down on the ocean, as U-456 surfaces into a restless swell, her diesels coughing to life while exhausted. Men blink salt from their eyes and draw in air that smells faintly of land. Keller stands once more in the conning tower, hands gripping the cold rail, watching seabirds wheel overhead, their cries sharp and insistent. And he feels the tension of a patrol that has gone on too long, the kind of tension that never fully leaves a man until he is ashore. The boat has survived another run, chalking up sinkings and near misses, and yet something gnaws at him, a subtle discomfort he cannot quite name, as if the ocean itself has grown less forgiving. Reports from other boats filter in through the radio room, their clipped messages stripped of emotion but heavy with implication. Escorts appearing faster than expected. Aircraft arriving seemingly out of nowhere. Contacts lost and then regained with unsettling precision. In the wardroom, over thin coffee and hard bread, officers speak in lowered voices, trading rumors picked up from other patrols. Stories of boats forced deep by relentless pursuit, of charges falling closer, patterns tighter, the enemy's reactions sharper. Meyer mentions a contact 2 nights earlier, an escort that altered course with uncanny timing, as if it had sensed U-456's presence through the water itself. And Keller listens without comment, filing the detail away. Above them, the Atlantic looks unchanged, waves marching endlessly toward shore, sunlight breaking through gaps in the cloud. But Keller knows better than to trust appearances, because war has taught him that the most dangerous shifts are the ones you cannot see. By mid-morning, the radio crackles with an order from headquarters, directing U-456 to return to base for refit and resupply. A welcome instruction that brings a ripple of relief through the crew, who have grown gaunt and hollow-eyed in the steel confinement. As the French coastline emerges from the haze, Keller studies it with mixed emotions, because ports have become dangerous places now, magnets for bombs and mines, their defenses stretched thin by the growing reach of Allied air power. The approach is tense, flat guns manned, eyes scanning the sky. And when a distant aircraft appears, every man freezes until its shape resolves into something familiar. Not yet another threat from above. In the harbor, U-456 slides into her berth among other submarines, their hulls scarred and patched, crews moving with the weary efficiency of men who know they will soon return to sea. Keller steps onto the quay, boots clanging on metal, and inhales deeply the smell of fuel oil, wet concrete, and smoke, grounding him in a world that feels briefly solid after weeks of motion and uncertainty. At headquarters, briefings are more crowded than before, charts layered with new symbols, convoy routes crisscrossed by arrows and shaded zones. And Keller notices the change immediately, the way staff officers speak with more urgency, their confidence edged with something harder. An intelligence officer explains new Allied tactics in careful, clinical language, mentioning improved radar sets, longer-range aircraft, escort carriers that extend air cover far into what were once safe hunting grounds. The words hang in the air, and Keller feels a flicker of irritation, because he has heard such warnings before, and the Atlantic has always found a way to swallow them. Yet this time, the tone is different, less speculative, more insistent, backed by loss reports that are no longer abstract numbers, but names and boats he recognizes. In a quiet moment afterward, Keller studies a map showing the mid-Atlantic gap shrinking, shaded areas creeping outward like a slow tide, and he realizes that the ocean itself is being measured and mastered in ways that were once unthinkable. He meets briefly with another commander, a man he trained with years earlier, who has lost friends on recent patrols. Boats that never returned, their last signals cut short or never sent at all. They exchange the kind of words men use when there is nothing useful to say. Jokes that fall flat. Reassurances neither fully believes. And then they part, each retreating into his own thoughts. That night, Keller walks along the quay, listening to the distant thud of bombs falling somewhere inland, watching the reflections of harbor lights ripple across dark water, and he feels the weight of command settle heavily on him. He knows that orders will send him back out soon, back into an ocean that feels subtly altered, as if lines have been drawn beneath the surface, invisible but inescapable. Far away, in rooms filled with humming equipment and men staring intently at glowing screens, those lines are already tightening, converging on the very waters Keller has learned to call home. The 16th of March 1943. North Atlantic, south of Greenland. The wind howls across the gray expanse as U-456 surfaces into a rising sea, her bow lifting and falling with slow violence while icy spray sweeps the deck and freezes where it lands, turning steel slick and treacherous. Keller grips the rail in the conning tower, eyes narrowed against the sting of salt, and listens to the altered rhythm of the ocean. Because even the sea seems angrier here. Colder, less predictable than it was weeks before. Below him, the boat vibrates with restrained power, diesel straining as the helmsman keeps her on course through the swell, and Keller senses the fatigue in his crew, men who have learned to hide exhaustion behind discipline and routine. The radio message came at dawn. Convoy inbound from Halifax, heavy escort reported. But orders are orders, and U-456 has been placed once more along the shipping lanes that feed Britain's survival. The Atlantic air smells clean and merciless, carrying no hint of land, only distance and exposure, and Keller knows that up here, on the surface, they are faster, deadlier, but also more visible than ever. Meyer joins him in the tower, shouting updates over the wind, pointing to the horizon where cloud meets sea. And Keller nods, issuing brief commands, his mind already calculating risk against opportunity. They have been told to expect air patrols farther out now. Aircraft with longer legs, flying from bases Keller once considered irrelevant to his war, and he resents the intrusion of the sky into what had always been an underwater contest. Mid-morning passes without contact, the hours marked only by changing light and the endless movement of water, and Keller begins to feel the familiar tension of waiting, stretched thin by uncertainty. Then it happens without warning. A shout from the bridge watch cuts through the wind, urgent and sharp, and Keller snaps his binoculars up just in time to see it. A dark speck descending rapidly from the cloud base, growing larger with terrifying speed. Aircraft, someone yells, the word carrying, shock and disbelief. Because the position should have been safe, beyond the reach of land-based patrols. And Keller's heart lurches as the realization sinks in. The shape resolves into a twin-engined bomber, its silhouette unmistakable now, wings steady, nose angled toward the sea. And Keller knows this is no chance encounter. Orders explode from him in rapid succession, the practiced rhythm of emergency taking over. Engines roaring as the crew scrambles to respond. Crash dive, he shouts, and the alarm wails through the boat, a sound that tightens every muscle aboard as men abandon posts and hurl themselves below. U-456 shudders as the deck floods. The tower hatch slams shut, and the world becomes steel and dim red light. the ocean closing overhead with a violence that feels personal. Depth gauges spin downward as the boat angles sharply, the hull groaning under sudden pressure, and Keller grips the periscope housing, bracing himself as the sea asserts its weight. Seconds later, the first explosion rocks the boat, distant but unmistakable, a concussive thump that rattles fittings and sends loose objects clattering across the deck. Another follows, closer this time, the sound sharper, more intimate, and Keller feels the shockwave ripple through the hull, a reminder that the enemy has found them, not by chance, but by design. The crew moves with drilled precision, voices low, faces tight, as valves are adjusted and motors quieted, the boat slipping into near silence to become once more a ghost in the deep. Keller listens intently, counting the seconds between explosions, noting the pattern, the spacing, because even under attack there is information to be gathered, clues to the enemy's skill and intent. The depth charges fall again and again, walking closer with each pass, the water outside hammering the hull, lights flickering as the pressure mounts. This is not the clumsy pursuit Keller remembers from earlier years. Not the hopeful guesswork of escorts dropping charges where they think a submarine might be. This feels measured, systematic, as if someone above can see them through the water, track their movement, anticipate their turns. Minutes stretch into an hour, the air growing stale and hot despite the cold sea outside. Sweat beading on faces as men fight the instinct to move, to breathe too loudly, to break the fragile illusion of invisibility. At last, the explosions cease, replaced by the distant churn of propellers fading away, and Keller allows himself a shallow breath, though he does not yet give the order to surface. He knows better now. When they finally rise hours later, cautiously, the sea greets them with deceptive calm, the sky clearing as if nothing has happened, and Keller feels a cold anger settle in his chest. They were found too quickly, too precisely, and no amount of experience can explain it away. In the control room, damage reports come in, minor but sobering, cracked fittings, strained hull plates, reminders that luck has limits. That night, Keller writes in his log with careful, formal language, noting the attack, the aircraft's timing, the depth charge pattern. And as he sets the pen down, he understands that the Atlantic has acquired new eyes, and they are learning fast. The 6th of April, 1943. The night should have been their shield, a thick, lightless cloak over black water, but Keller stands in the conning tower of U-456 with an unease he cannot suppress, listening to the diesels and watching the darkness for signs that refuse to stay hidden. Stars are smeared by thin cloud, the moon absent, and yet the ocean feels exposed, as if the surface itself has been lit by something unseen, every ripple and wake suddenly legible to hostile eyes. Below, the crew moves quietly, tension woven into their routines, because the patrol has already been marked by too many close calls, too many sudden aircraft sightings where none should exist. Shortly after midnight, the radio brings a brief, urgent message from another boat in the pack, reporting contact with a convoy and immediate attack by escorts equipped with new detection gear. The message ends abruptly, no sign-off, no follow-up, and the silence that follows presses heavily on Keller as he orders U-456 toward the reported position. They arrive hours later, surfacing cautiously, periscope sweeping the horizon, and what Keller sees makes his jaw tighten. Escorts maneuvering with confidence, their formation tight, their movements purposeful, searchlights snapping on and off in disciplined arcs. This is no panicked response to a sudden threat, but a coordinated hunt already in progress. Meyer voices what the others are thinking, quietly, almost to himself, that the enemy seems to know where to look, and Keller does not rebuke him, because the evidence is impossible to ignore. U-456 submerges again, slipping beneath the waves, motors whispering, as Keller tries to position for an attack that now feels increasingly dangerous. Sonar pings echo faintly through the hull, rhythmic and patient, a mechanical heartbeat that sends a chill through every man aboard, because the sound carries intent, a steady probing rather than blind searching. Keller closes his eyes briefly, recalling the early war years when sonar was crude and unreliable, when a skilled commander could outmaneuver it with depth and silence. Now, the pings grow louder, sharper, adjusting with their movement, as if the ocean itself is relaying their position upward. The first depth charges come quickly, explosions spaced with chilling accuracy, forcing U-456 deeper, her hull flexing and complaining as the pressure builds. Men brace themselves against bulkheads, teeth clenched, as lights flicker and gauges quiver. And Keller feels the old confidence eroding, replaced by a relentless focus on survival. He orders a hard turn, then another, changing depth and speed, deploying decoys in the hope of confusing the escorts, and for a moment the explosions drift away, hope flaring briefly. It dies just as quickly when the charges return, closer than before. A brutal confirmation that the enemy has adapted, compensating for every trick Keller knows. Somewhere above, an escort captain studies a glowing screen, interprets echoes and bearings, and issues calm orders that translate into steel and fire raining down through the sea. The attack drags on for hours, the crew's nerves stretched to the breaking point, air growing foul, condensation dripping from overhead, the boat reduced to a trembling shell in a vast, hostile void. At one point, a particularly close blast knocks Keller off his feet, sending him sprawling across the control room, and for a heartbeat he tastes fear so sharp it feels like metal on his tongue. He regains his footing and his composure, barking orders with renewed intensity. Because there is no room for weakness. Not here, not now. Eventually, the sonar pings fade. The escort's moving on, perhaps convinced they have killed their prey, perhaps drawn away by another contact. U-456 survives, but the victory feels hollow, stripped of triumph, because they have been driven off without firing a single torpedo. When they surface at dawn, the sea is calm, almost mocking, sunlight glinting off gentle waves, and Keller stares at it with a sense of betrayal. The Atlantic, once a vast refuge of darkness and depth, now seems to whisper their secrets upward, offering no hiding place, no mercy. In his log, Keller writes tersely of advanced enemy sonar and improved coordination, and as he closes the book, he understands that something fundamental has shifted, and the wolves are no longer alone in the night. The 3rd of May 1943. North Atlantic, east of Newfoundland. Cold rain lashes the sea in slanted sheets as U-456 runs surfaced at reduced speed. Her diesels muted, her crew hunched against the wind, every sense strained for signs of an enemy that no longer announces itself. Keller stands in the conning tower, jaw set, eyes burning from fatigue, and he feels the weight of the date more than he should, because May has arrived, and with it a grim awareness, spreading through the U-boat arm, that this month is different. Signals from headquarters arrive more frequently now, their tone sharpened by urgency, their content stripped of reassurance, reporting losses in stark numbers that climb faster than anyone wants to admit. Boats are disappearing at a rate Keller has never seen before, entire crews erased between transmissions, their final reports ending mid-sentence or not coming at all, leaving only empty grid squares on the charts. Below decks, conversation has thinned to necessity, laughter rare and brittle, the men conserving energy and nerve, each silently calculating how much longer luck can reasonably be expected to hold. The radio operator passes up another message, hands trembling despite himself, and Keller reads it quickly, his expression hardening as he learns of 3 boats lost in the last 48 hours along adjacent patrol lines. No heroic last stands are described, no victories claimed, only contact, pursuit, and silence. Keller orders U-456 to alter course, hoping to avoid the worst of the kill zones now rumored among the crews. But he knows the ocean has grown small, partitioned by Allied coverage that overlaps and closes like a net. Midday brings low cloud and poor visibility, conditions that once favored submarines, but Keller no longer takes comfort in them, because he has seen aircraft materialize out of weather like predators bursting from cover. The sound comes first, distant but unmistakable, a droning that raises every head aboard, followed by the shout from the bridge watch, that confirms their fear. An aircraft breaks through the cloud, banking sharply, sunlight flashing off its wings, and Keller recognizes the type instantly. Long-range patrol, designed to be here, designed to find him. Orders fly, engines surge, and again, the crash dive alarm screams through the boat, its urgency now familiar enough to be terrifying. U-456 plunges. The enemy has not only found them quickly, he has arrived already prepared. Inside the boat, the shock is violent. Men thrown against bulkheads, tools crashing loose, a seam somewhere above weeping water that is quickly plugged by shaking hands. Keller forces himself to think, to analyze patterns even as the hull groans, noting the precision of the drops, the way the explosions bracket their depth with deliberate intent. This is not harassment. It is execution attempted with professional calm. The attack does not relent. Escort propellers join the aircraft overhead, their combined presence pressing down on U-456 from above like a physical weight. Sonar pings, locking on with chilling consistency. Hours pass measured only by explosions and whispered depth reports, the air turning sour, sweat soaking uniforms despite the cold steel walls. Keller moves among his men, offering brief words, steadying hands, his own fear locked away behind discipline and responsibility, because if he breaks, the boat breaks with him. At last, a chance opens, a brief lull in the pattern, and Keller seizes it, ordering a slow, silent drift deeper, trusting to darkness and pressure rather than maneuver. The gamble works, barely. The sounds fade, first the explosions, then the pings, until only the deep, indifferent silence of the ocean remains. U-456 survives again, but survival now feels like postponement rather than victory. When they surface after nightfall, Keller counts the faces on deck and feels an unexpected wave of relief, followed immediately by the heavier realization that other boats have not been so fortunate. The radio confirms it before dawn. More losses, entire patrol lines shattered, May already bleeding the U-boat arm dry. Keller stares at the message, rain dripping from his cap onto the paper, and understands with sudden clarity that the enemy has seized the initiative completely. The Atlantic has become a battlefield, where every movement is observed, every mistake punished. There is nowhere left for the wolves to run. The 8th of May, 1943. The sea is steel gray under a low ceiling of cloud as U-456 creeps forward at periscope depth, electric motors barely whispering, every man aboard acutely aware that this stretch of water has become one of the most dangerous on Earth. Keller peers through the eyepiece, rotating it fraction by fraction, the horizon sliding past in narrow slices, and he feels as though he is looking through a keyhole into a world that no longer belongs to him. Above, unseen, Allied convoys move with a confidence Keller has never witnessed before. Their escorts tight and numerous, their formations precise, as if the chaos of the Atlantic has finally been tamed. A faint smudge appears in the periscope view, and Keller's instinct as a hunter clashes violently with his instinct to survive. This convoy is rich with targets, but it is also wrapped in layers of protection that feel suffocating, a moving fortress rather than a vulnerable line of merchants. Meyer waits for the order to attack, his face drawn and hollow, eyes flicking between Keller and the depth gauges, and Keller hesitates longer than he ever has before. In earlier years, this decision would have been simple, almost automatic. But now, every attack risks annihilation, and Keller knows that one more lost boat is not just a statistic, but a further tearing of a force already stretched beyond endurance. He orders a cautious approach, adjusting depth and angle, hoping for a fleeting opening. A mistake by the escorts. But the convoy moves with infuriating discipline. No gaps, no blind corners. Sonar pings begin to echo through the hull, faint at first, then stronger, as if the escorts have sensed a presence without fully committing. Probing the water ahead like fingers testing a wound, Keller feels the trap forming and orders U-456 deeper, abandoning the attack before it can begin. A decision that tastes bitter, even as it feels necessary. The withdrawal does not go unnoticed. Within minutes, The pings sharpen, their rhythm tightening. And Keller knows with a sinking certainty that they have been marked, tracked, categorized as prey. Depth charges follow soon after, exploding with brutal force. The sound no longer shocking but wearyingly familiar. A punctuation mark in a sentence that has been repeating for weeks. The hull trembles. Light bulbs shatter. And somewhere aft, a man cries out as he is thrown hard against a bulkhead. The reality of flesh and bone colliding with steel, cutting through the abstraction of tactics and tonnage. Keller fights to maintain control, ordering course changes and depth adjustments, deploying decoys, doing everything doctrine and experience allow. But the escorts respond with equal speed, their patterns adapting almost immediately. This is what frightens him most. There is no delay, no confusion, no sense that the enemy is guessing. Instead, every move is met with a counter, as if U-456's intentions are being read directly from the water. Hours pass in this underwater duel, the escorts relentless, their depth charges walking methodically across the seafloor above and around the submarine. The air grows heavy and oppressive, carbon dioxide levels creeping upward, men breathing shallowly to conserve what little freshness remains. Keller's uniform is soaked through with sweat despite the cold, his head pounding, his thoughts narrowing to a brutal calculus of pressure, time, and endurance. At last, the attack slackens. Not because the escorts have failed, but because the convoy must move on, its schedule and safety outweighing the destruction of a single submarine. U-456 sinks deeper, settling into a silent drift. The crew frozen in place, afraid that even movement might draw the enemy back. When they finally surface long after nightfall, the sky is empty, the stars sharp and indifferent, and Keller feels no relief, only a dull, grinding exhaustion. The radio brings grim confirmation of what they already sense. Multiple boats, destroyed in the same waters over the last days. Some caught while attacking, others simply transiting, their fates sealed by detection they could not escape. The term kill zone circulates quietly among commanders now, a phrase spoken without drama, because drama has given way to resignation. Keller studies his charts, seeing not opportunities but traps, entire regions shaded in his mind as lethal, and realizes that the Atlantic has been divided into spaces where U-boats can no longer exist. The wolves still roam, still bite when they can. But the forest has been cleared, mapped, and patrolled. As U-456 turns away from the convoy lanes, Keller understands that this is no longer a contest of daring and initiative, but a matter of how long survival can be postponed in a sea that has learned how to kill them. The 12th of May, 1943. The sea rolls heavily under a sky, the color of lead as U-456 runs deep, her electric motors barely turning, and Keller sits in the control room with his cap off, eyes fixed on the depth gauge, as if willing it to remain steady. The numbers matter now more than ever, because pressure has become a constant companion, not just from the ocean outside, but from the war itself, closing in from all sides. The radio has brought nothing but bad news for days. Each transmission, a quiet hammer blow, reporting boats lost with increasing regularity, entire wolf packs shattered before they can even assemble. Keller listens in silence as the radio operator reads another message, voice flat with shock, announcing the destruction of U-640 and U-711, boats whose commanders Keller knows by name, men he drank with only weeks earlier. There is no time to mourn, no space for anger, only a growing, suffocating awareness that May has become a slaughterhouse. The attack comes in the afternoon, sudden and overwhelming. Sonar pings slam into the hull with aggressive clarity, faster and louder than Keller has ever heard, and before he can issue a full set of orders, the first depth charges explode, close enough to knock instruments out of alignment. U-456 bucks like a wounded animal, lights flickering as men are thrown to the deck, the sound of tearing metal echoing through the pressure hull. Water sprays from a fractured pipe, cold and relentless, and damage control teams rush to contain it, hands numb as they work under red emergency lighting. Keller shouts commands, his voice hoarse but steady, ordering emergency maneuvers that would have shaken off older escorts. But the response above is immediate and precise. The charges fall in patterns that feel premeditated, not reactive, boxing the submarine in with ruthless efficiency. The air grows thick with the smell of oil and sweat and fear, the boat creaking and groaning like a living thing under torture. And Keller realizes that this time, survival is far from certain. For nearly 3 hours, the escorts maintain contact, circling, attacking, withdrawing only to return with renewed accuracy, as if daring the submarine to make a fatal mistake. One particularly close explosion extinguishes the lights completely, plunging the boat into darkness broken only by shouted orders and the hiss of damaged systems. In that moment, Keller feels time stretch and distort, the war narrowing to breath and heartbeat, and the knowledge that dozens of lives depend entirely on his decisions. At last, by a combination of luck, silence, and the escort's need to rejoin their convoy, the attack eases. The pings fading into the vastness above. U-456 drifts, crippled but alive, her crew slumped in place, faces pale, eyes hollow, the adrenaline bleeding away into exhaustion. When Keller finally orders a cautious ascent hours later, the sea greets them with bitter irony, calm and almost gentle, as if it had not tried to crush them moments before. On the surface, the radio delivers the truth in blunt language. May has already cost the U-boat arm more submarines than any previous month of the war. The numbers are staggering, unsustainable, and Keller feels their weight settle on him like another layer of pressure. In his cabin, he writes in his log with trembling hands, recording damage, contacts, and losses. Each word an act of discipline against despair. For the first time since the war began, Keller allows himself to think the unthinkable. That this battle, fought for years in darkness and depth, may already be lost. May is not yet over, but its verdict is becoming impossible to ignore. The 18th of May, 1943. North Atlantic. Returning eastward, U-456 moves slowly through a restless sea, her speed deliberately reduced to spare damaged systems, and Keller watches the gray water slide past the hull with a detachment he no longer tries to fight. The boat is wounded but functional, her pressure hull holding, her crew intact, and yet the atmosphere aboard feels heavier than after any previous patrol, because survival alone no longer feels like success. Radio traffic has become constant, a stream of updates and directives that leave little room for hope, and Keller senses the strain even in the clipped language of headquarters. An order arrives just after dawn, encoded and brief, instructing all boats to break off operations and withdraw from the most heavily defended convoy routes, a message that would have been unthinkable only months earlier. Keller reads it twice, then hands it back to the radio operator without comment. But the significance settles over him like a physical weight. This is not a tactical pause. It is an admission. In the control room, officers exchange glances, no one speaking, because everyone understands what this means. The wolves are being pulled back from the hunt. Meyer finally breaks the silence, asking quietly whether the order is temporary, and Keller answers with a measured shrug, because honesty now requires restraint rather than reassurance. As U-456 alters course, turning away from the convoy lanes that once defined their purpose, Keller studies the charts and feels the Atlantic shrinking around him. Areas that were once marked as opportunity are now hazards, and the safe spaces between them have narrowed to threads that can be cut at any moment. Throughout the day, radio messages confirm what the order implies. More boats lost, more commanders missing. The attrition curve rising too steeply for even Dönitz's relentless arithmetic to justify. The men aboard sense the shift as keenly as Keller does. There is no celebration at having survived another patrol, no talk of tonnage sunk or victories earned, only quiet maintenance and the careful tending of damage, as if the boat itself has become the mission. That afternoon, Keller allows himself a rare moment alone in his cabin, staring at the bulkhead where past successes are marked in chalk. Neat symbols representing ships destroyed. He studies them now without pride, aware that the marks belong to another phase of the war, one that is closing rapidly behind him. A memory surfaces unbidden, Dönitz's voice during an early war briefing, confident and forceful, promising that control of the Atlantic would decide everything. Keller wonders what the Admiral would say now, faced with charts that show not dominance but retreat. As night falls, U-456 surfaces. Cautiously, the stars faint behind cloud, and Keller steps onto the bridge, breathing deeply, feeling the wind cut through his coat. The ocean looks the same as it always has, vast and indifferent, but he knows better now than to trust appearances. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Allied escorts continue their steady patrols, radar sweeping, sonar listening, aircraft circling in patient arcs. They do not need to rush anymore. U-456 presses eastward, no longer a hunter stalking prey, but a survivor slipping through gaps in a net that is being drawn tighter with every passing day. Keller grips the rail and accepts what he has resisted for weeks, that the balance has tipped irreversibly, and that this war beneath the waves is entering a phase where courage and skill may no longer be enough. The 24th of May 1943. Berlin. U-Boat Command Headquarters. Rain streaks down the tall windows of the headquarters building, as Admiral Karl Dönitz stands over a long table crowded with charts, his hands braced against the edge, eyes fixed on the latest loss reports spread before him. The room smells of paper, ink, and stale cigarette smoke, the air heavy with the tension of men who know they are witnessing a turning point they cannot undo. Staff officers stand nearby, silent and rigid, their faces drawn, uniforms immaculate but rumpled at the edges, betraying days without proper rest. Each report is clinical, precise, and devastating. Dates, grid squares, brief contact notes, and then the same stark conclusion repeated again and again: boat lost. No survivors. Dönitz straightens slowly, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose, because the numbers no longer require interpretation. They speak plainly now. May's losses have reached a level that defies even the harsh logic of attritional warfare. Submarines destroyed faster than they can be built, trained crews vanishing into the Atlantic at a pace no amount of propaganda can disguise. An aide clears his throat and begins summarizing the situation, describing Allied radar improvements, the integration of air and sea escorts, the deployment of escort carriers that have erased the last truly safe waters. Dönitz listens without interruption, his expression controlled, but those closest to him can see the strain in his posture, the way his shoulders seem heavier than before. For years, he has believed, preached, and demanded faith in the U-boat as Germany's decisive weapon, the means by which a maritime power could be strangled into submission. Now the evidence lies uncomfortably close, marked in red ink across maps of the Atlantic that look less like battlefields and more like graveyards. One officer hesitates before speaking, then reports that commanders in the field are requesting withdrawal, citing unsustainable losses and enemy detection capabilities beyond anything previously encountered. The word unsustainable hangs in the air, an unspoken admission that the limits of sacrifice have been reached. Dönitz nods once, slowly. He recalls earlier months when setbacks were explained away as temporary, when new countermeasures were promised, when faith in innovation seemed enough to restore the balance. But innovation has flowed both ways, and the enemy's pace has proven faster, broader, and more ruthlessly applied. He turns back to the table and studies a chart tracking sinkings versus losses, the curves diverging sharply in the wrong direction, and for the first time, allows himself to accept what the Atlantic has already decided. Orders are drafted that afternoon, careful in wording, deliberate in tone, directing the majority of U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes, to regroup, refit, and wait. It is not called a defeat. It is framed as a pause, a reassessment. But everyone in the room understands its meaning. As the meeting breaks, Dönitz remains behind, staring at the map alone, the silence of the room pressing in as heavily as the weight of the war. He knows that history will judge this moment, that the gamble he championed has reached its limit, not through lack of courage, but through the relentless advance of enemy science and coordination. Outside, Berlin moves on under gray skies, unaware of the quiet decision just made. While far away, in the cold, indifferent Atlantic, fewer U-boats now prowl the convoy lanes. The wolves are being called home, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement that the sea has turned against them. The 2nd of June 1943. The coastline emerges through early morning mist as U-456 limps toward harbor, her hull stained with salt and oil, her pace slower than on any return Keller can remember. The men gather on deck in silence, some leaning against the rail, others staring toward land with expressions that mix relief and something darker, a knowledge that homecoming no longer carries the promise it once did. Keller stands apart, watching the shoreline grow clearer, the low hills and scattered buildings resolving into familiarity, and he feels a strange dislocation, as if he is returning from a war that has already ended without announcement. The radio confirms what everyone suspects. Many berths in the submarine pens now stand empty, their crews lost in May's relentless toll, their absence more eloquent than any casualty list. As they enter the harbor, flak guns track the sky automatically, reflexes honed by months of air attack, and Keller notes the increased defenses with a detached eye, aware that even ports have become front lines. U-456 ties up among boats that look much like her, scarred, patched, survivors rather than victors, and the crews exchange subdued nods rather than jokes or boasts. On the quay, an officer quietly reads off names of boats that will not be returning, his voice steady but drained, and Keller listens as familiar designations pass like echoes of ghosts. He recognizes friends in the litany, men who shared classrooms, mess halls, and early triumphs, now reduced to brief mentions and administrative finality. There are no speeches, no ceremonies, only paperwork, inspections, and the efficient processing of men who have seen too much to be comforted by routine. In debriefings, Keller recounts encounters that mirror those of every other returning commander. Aircraft appearing without warning, escorts maintaining contact with unnerving consistency, depth charges falling with calculated precision. The analysts nod grimly, recording details they already know, building a picture that has become painfully clear. At night, in the barracks, the survivors speak in hushed tones, trading stories that differ only in specifics, each confirming that the Atlantic of 1943 is not the Atlantic of 1941. Sleep comes poorly, haunted by the memory of explosions and the absence of those who did not surface, and Keller finds himself waking to the imagined echo of sonar pings. News filters down from headquarters, carefully worded but unmistakable, acknowledging that the U-boat arm has suffered a decisive setback and that future operations will be limited and defensive. No one argues. The argument has already been made by the ocean. Keller walks the quay again one evening, watching the sun sink behind the pens, shadows stretching across concrete and steel, and he feels an unexpected sense of mourning, not just for lost men, but for the belief that once sustained them, the idea that skill, daring, and will could overcome any obstacle has been shattered by an enemy who fought with machines, coordination, and patience. U-456 will sail again. Perhaps, but not as part of a great offensive, not as a wolf among many. She will sail cautiously, experimentally, as Germany searches for answers that may come too late. As Keller looks out over the harbor, he understands that those who returned are not victors, but witnesses, carrying the knowledge of how and when the Battle of the Atlantic truly turned. The 15th of July, 1943. North Atlantic. Allied convoy route. The sea rolls calmly beneath a wide summer sky as a convoy pushes westward, merchant ships steaming in disciplined columns while escorts trace steady arcs around them, their wakes white and confident. On the bridge of a British destroyer, a young lieutenant watches the water through binoculars, his posture relaxed but alert, ears tuned to the quiet rhythm of machinery rather than the expectation of sudden chaos. Below him, radar operators monitor glowing screens in darkened compartments, their hands steady, their voices calm as they call out contacts and ranges with the assurance of men who trust their instruments. An escort carrier steams nearby, squat and purposeful, its flight deck alive with activity as aircraft are readied, launched, recovered. An airborne shield that did not exist when the war began. The Atlantic feels different now, not tamed, but managed, parceled into sectors covered by overlapping layers of detection and response. A sonar ping echoes through the water, deliberate and probing, and the operator smiles faintly when nothing answers back but the soft, reassuring return of empty sea. Somewhere far below, there may still be submarines, but they no longer dictate the terms of the battle. Depth charges remain armed, guns manned, vigilance unbroken, yet the tension that once defined every crossing has eased into something closer to routine. The convoy presses on, cargo holds heavy with fuel, food and machinery. The lifeblood of a war effort that now flows more freely across the ocean. In operations rooms ashore, charts are updated with confidence rather than dread. Losses tracked, but no longer feared as catastrophic. The mid-Atlantic gap that once swallowed ships without warning has been closed, erased by air cover and coordination, its memory lingering only in reports and photographs. Across the sea, German submarines wait in ports or operate cautiously on distant fronts, their numbers reduced, their impact blunted, their former dominance a fading memory. The Atlantic wind still blows cold and indifferent. Waves still rise and fall without regard for human struggle, but the balance of power upon it has shifted decisively. The battle continues, but its outcome is no longer in doubt. The ocean that once favored the hunter now belongs to those who learned how to see beneath its surface. August 1943. Berlin. In a quiet office far from the sea, Admiral Karl Dönitz speaks the words that will follow him into history, acknowledging in measured, restrained language what the Atlantic has already proven. The U-boat war, he admits, has been lost. There is no drama in the moment, no grand gesture, only the sober recognition that technology, coordination, and relentless pressure have overcome courage and experience. Across Europe, surviving commanders receive the implications of that admission in revised orders, reduced patrols, experimental tactics that hint at desperation rather than confidence. Men like Friedrich Keller continue to serve, to sail when ordered, to fight when opportunity allows. But the sense of inevitability has seeped into every operation. The Atlantic remains vast, cold, and unforgiving, but it no longer belongs to the wolves who once ruled its nights. Their era ends not with a single battle or final explosion, but with a gradual, undeniable silence. As fewer submarines slip beneath the waves and fewer never return, history will remember the turning point as a convergence of moments, of inventions, of decisions made in steel rooms and rolling seas. But for those who lived it, the turning was felt in the gut, in the tightening of sonar pings, in the sudden appearance of aircraft where none should be, in the empty berths of harbors once crowded with boats. The Battle of the Atlantic did not end in 1943, but its outcome was sealed in those brutal months when the sea itself seemed to rise against the U-boat arm. And long after the war, when the Atlantic rolls on in endless motion, it carries with it the memory of a time when hunters became hunted,